Hello, wonderful people. This engaging narrative is titled Confessions of Nollywood. Chief Ogadagidi was a famous Nollywood filmmaker known for his flamboyancy and charming charisma. That hot afternoon, the day his world crumbled, he sat in his grand film studio in Lagos, facing Lisa, a sharp and bold journalist. The bright lights of the cameras made his face smooth and shiny. Lisa was pressuring him to return a mask he claimed to have bought in Enugu. But Chief Ogadagidi would not do that. He forced a smile as he continued to beat around the bush, his fingers tapping nervously on the chair's armrest. And before anyone could realize it, the mask revenged. Chief's face twisted with pain. His eyes rolled back, and when he tried to get up and run, the very chair he was sitting on grabbed his legs, and Ogadagidi fell down, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. His colleagues screamed, dropping their equipment as panic spread like wildfire. Chief was rushed to the best hospital, sirens blaring through the city traffic. But when they arrived, something felt wrong. The air inside the hospital grew cold, heavy with fear. Nurses and doctors hesitated, their eyes wide with dread. Someone whispered, "Another one?" News quickly spread across Lagos and the whole of Nigeria. Another heavy weight in Nollywood is down. Rumors grew wild, talks of a strange sickness and strange death. People whispered of curses, dark secrets, and angry spirits. Some said Chief Ogadagidi's fall was punishment for mocking his own culture. Others believed a dark force was lurking in the heart of Nollywood, claiming them one by one. No one slept easy that night. The hospital room smelled of antiseptics and hopelessness. Doctors, dressed in their white coats, whispered among themselves, shaking their heads in frustration. Their scans showed nothing, their drugs did nothing, and their science had surrendered to forces beyond their comprehension. As days rolled into weeks, and weeks into months, Chief Ogadagidi, once a man of boundless energy and booming laughter, lay limp on the hospital bed, his skin pale and his breath shallow. His eyes, sunken and glassy, darted about in terror, as if he could see things no one else could. "Doctor, any improvement?" a worried voice asked. Dr. Nelson, the head physician, sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Nothing. We've tested for every known illness. His organs are fine, his blood is clean, but life is going out of him. Whichever spirit that was dealing with Chief should have taken him right away, but it seems that the vengeful spirit merely kept him alive to torment him. As he was being taken from one hospital to the other, his resources dwindled. That was also a common pattern among a number of Nollywood stars who suffered from strange illness. The abnormal sickness made sure it drained the last money from the victim. And even when the victim swallows shame to ask for monetary assistance, friends of colleagues tend to distance themselves from coming to assist. A number of wealthy Nollywood stars have either died wretched or forced into disappearance by poverty. Ogadagidi had a lot of friends when he became the new masquerade. But 8 months into his dilemma, Chief Ogadagidi has no one to call a friend, no colleague to comfort him, and no money to pay for his mounting hospital bills. A pastor in a crisp suit stepped forward. Chief must not die, his Bible clutched tightly in his hand. "This is not an illness of the flesh, it is spiritual," he declared, his voice firm. The doctors and nurses made way as the pastor walked to Ogadagidi's bedside. Raising his Bible high, he bellowed, "Any spirit tormenting this man, I come against you. Leave in Jesus' name." For hours, the pastor battled with spirits that nobody saw. The room was in flames by unseen fire. And when the fire of the mind went off, people discovered that nothing happened. Whatever spirit that was tormenting Ogadagidi has refused to leave. The pastor frowned and tried again the next day, this time louder. "Fire from heaven," he commanded. "I destroy every ancestral curse, every marine spirit, and every spirit of envy." A low groan escaped from Chief's throat at interval, his body trembling violently. His eyes rolled back, his lips quivering, but he did not wake. The pastor wiped sweat from his forehead. "His faith is weak," he muttered, stepping away. A Catholic priest was also invited from Enugu State, a man whom everyone believed would heal Ogadagidi. He started by swinging a smoking censer of frankincense over the dying man, and prayed fervently with his group. May the Lord cast out all evil spirits, he murmured in Latin. He sprinkled holy water and holy oil everywhere. Still, nothing. The room grew tense. Prayer warriors that came with him exchanged uneasy glances. The problem with Chief Ogadagidi has become like the problem of one Nigeria. The more Christians pray for one Nigeria in distress, the more the Nigerian problems grew wings. And when they pray for good leader, a devil is either imposed on them or rigs his way into office. Then came a man who described himself as born-again traditionalist. He was brought by the chief's in-law. Everyone was trying to do what he can to save a life. The traditionalist was a clean-shaved elderly man with cowries dangling from his neck, his robe decorated with intricate Nsibidi symbols. He was the last hope. His old wise eyes examined the man before him. "This is not a sickness," he finally declared. "We already know that," Dr. Nelson snapped, looking exhausted. The traditionalist ignored him. He reached into his goatskin bag and pulled out a bundle of alligator pepper. He crushed it with his teeth, whispering ancient incantations, then marked symbols on Ogadagidi's forehead. The hospital air grew heavy. The lights flickered. A strange breeze swept through the room, though the windows were closed. Ogadagidi stirred. His lips moved, whispering words too faint to hear. "Speak," the born-again traditionalist commanded. Ogadagidi's eyes flew open, wild with fear. His mouth twisted as though something inside him was forcing him to speak. And then, in a voice that was not his own, he confessed. I have mocked them," he rasped. "The spirits of the land, the ancestors. I spat on their sacred principles." The room fell silent. "They came to me in my dream," Ogadagidi continued, his body shuddering. "But I did not listen. My pastor gave me hopes of salvation at the end. I never knew it would come to this. People took your age and your white hairs to be wisdom." The traditionalist's voice was firm. "Look at what you have done to Igbo land." Tears welled in the dying man's eyes. His lips quivered as the weight of his sins crushed his soul. "You turned my back on your heritage." The born-again traditionalist continued with his assault. "You made movies that laughed at our essence. Cultism and sacrifices of blood was all you are known for? Now tell me, Chief, I know you passed through a university. Are you saying you don't know that the white witches knowingly designed their catechism to teach our children that their ancestors were devils, and that only the white man's God could save them?" "I did it for money," Ogadagidi admitted, his voice hollow. "One Nigeria offered me no other chance at the time. But you continued even when you were swimming in Naira? You assumed almighty with your wealth, and our lovely mothers and sisters regretted knowing you. You defiled them, Chief." "I am ashamed of myself," Ogadagidi hissed. "Confess!" The born-again traditionalist commanded. "I must confess," Chief Ogadagidi said with the voice of a dying man. "The weight of my sins is pressing down on my chest, heavier than the sickness eating me from the inside. I have spent months on hospital beds listening to doctors. They are baffled by my condition. Men of God were here. They chanted their incantations, anointed my forehead with oil. Yet nothing changed. I am dying slowly, and I know why. I built an empire in Nollywood, a kingdom of flashing cameras, bright lights, and shattered dreams. They called me Chief Ogadakidi, the kingmaker, the gatekeeper. I held the keys to fame, and I made sure those who wanted it paid a heavy price. I remember when I started, an ambitious young man with a hunger for wealth and power. At first, I made movies with passion, but soon I discovered the dark shortcuts to riches. I saw how desperation made people vulnerable. I saw how young girls, fresh from the villages, came to the city with big dreams, ready to do anything for a role. And I gave them roles, but not before taking what I wanted. They came, one after the other, knocking on my office door. Some cried, some begged, some even ran away. But many stayed. They stayed because they saw no other way. And I took advantage of them, body and soul. I silenced those who dared to resist. I made a mess of Igbo heritage. Not as if I don't know. I knew what I was doing. My ultimate aim was to be counted as a strong civilian in one Nigeria. But my hands are stained with the tears of those I exploited, stained with the broken dreams I crushed under my feet. the spirits of our holy ancestors, which I have demonized. They whisper in my ears at night, calling my name, reminding me of stimulating the youth into cultism and other forms of heinous crimes. Silence swallowed the entire hospital as Chief Ogadagidi finished his confession. The very fear that had gripped the doctors and nurses was amplified. It reminded them of the proclamations of a fortune teller who once said that a man called Nollywood had forcefully impregnated Igbo land. But no one clearly understood what he meant then. The consultation was made when things suddenly went out of hand. It got to a point when morality was thrown into latrine and atrocities becoming the order of the day. As people began to avoid the land of their birth, many were asking, how did Igbo land get to this stage? Who did this to us? Even as many pointed accusing fingers to a project which they chose to call the British Nigeria, eminent scholars have fingered the Greco-Roman imperialists for maliciously swapping the Igbo man's belief system. In all these accusations, a fortune teller from Agulu alleged that a man called Nollywood has a hand in Igbo man's afflictions. He declared that Nollywood was a restless wanderer, searching for a place to plant his seed. One day he accidentally found Igbo land, a proud and fertile mother, rich in culture, wisdom, and dignity. Motherland was not a harlot, nor did she seek his attention. Just as it happens with hookup girls, it was one Nigeria that hooked Nollywood up with Igbo land. Motherland pleaded that Nollywood to take it easy, but he refused. The man was impatient. He forced himself on a gracious mother, leaving her heart bruised and her spirit shaken. Time passed and Motherland gave birth to twins. She looked into their faces and her heart grew heavy. The twins bore unmistakable resemblance of their father, both in looks and in spirit. They grew up to become children who engage in disquieting acts of cultism, teenagers who have no qualms kidnapping human beings for ransom or using their parents for money rituals. They roamed Igbo land, spreading tales of quick riches and worship for wealth. The unclean acts were consecrated in religious and political altars. Money were being sprayed in bundles. It became a general responsorial psalm in Igbo land that he who has gotten the most wealth has gotten the most talisman. Pastors who were begotten by Nollywood went about destroying people's heritage and sacred cultures, just as their father did. Prodigal native doctors went in search of poor and lazy people to crown them with powers of instant wealth. Igbo land wept for her children, not because she didn't love them, but because they carried the shadow of a legacy she never asked for. And so the tale of Nollywood in Igbo land became a legend, a warning that not all stories we tell or allow to be told grow into good fruit. The born-again traditionalist shook his head as Chief Ogadagidi finished his confessions, his face laced with sorrow. The gods have come for reckoning, he muttered. Ogadagidi's body convulsed violently. His mouth foamed, his arms flailed, but his eyes were locked onto something unseen, something that terrified him beyond words. They are here, he screamed. They are here to take me. A powerful wind howled through the hospital, slamming doors shut. The beeping machines flickered and died. The priest clutched his rosary. The pastor muttered prayers, but neither could stop what was happening. Then silence. Ogadagidi lay still, his mouth frozen mid-scream, his eyes wide open in death. The traditionalist sighed heavily, his voice barely above a whisper. The gods have spoken. The news of Chief's death spread like Harmattan fire across the land. Some called it a spiritual judgment. Others whispered that he had paid the ultimate price for betraying his ancestors. But beneath the gossip and fear, something deeper was stirring, a slow but powerful awakening. A long story which Nollywood helped to push up is now on its way down. For decades, the Igbo people had walked in the shadows of foreign gods, shackled not by chains of iron, but by chains of the mind. The missionaries had come not to enlighten, but to erase. The very devil who came to steal, kill, and destroy were strangers who killed the Igbo brethren, continues to steal their resources, and with a sophisticated form of social engineering, destroyed their unity. But now, for the first time in generations, the people were beginning to see the truth. They are beginning to recalibrate the standpoints that made them who they are. In village squares and city streets, in markets and homes, conversations were changing. Elders who had once been silent about the past began to speak. Young men and women, raised in the doctrines of foreign faiths, were now questioning everything they had been taught. They began to question how Mongo Park came to be the man who discovered the River Niger. When their grandparents had long fished in the River Niger, people began to raise alarm. One of them was Lisa, a university student who majored in journalism and linguistics. Lisa had grown up in the church and had swallowed the foreign disorienting doctrine throughout her childhood. She had been told that her ancestors were idol worshippers, that Igbo ancestry lived in darkness before the missionaries came. She had believed it until she began to read. She discovered books, hidden away in dusty libraries that spoke of Igbo cosmology, of the sacredness of the land, the mystery system of education. She came to understand the law of opposites and the balance between the physical and spiritual realms, just as her holy ancestors saw it. Most importantly, as Lisa learned about the destruction of black man's civilization, it occurred to him that the history of Igbo man and that of Africa in general needed to be rewritten. She read about Ofonaogu, the divine justice system that ensured fairness, long before Europeans spoke of laws. And then she realized her people were never lost. They were only deceived. The Igbo man merely walked out of himself with a long walk of miseducation. One evening, Lisa sat with her grandmother, a woman who had lived through the forced Christianization of Igbo land. "Grandmother," Lisa asked, "why did our people accept their ways so easily?" The old woman sighed, her wrinkled hands smoothing the folds of her wrapper. "My child, it was not easy. They did not come with swords, but with honeyed tongues. They came with schools. But the price of education was abandoning our ways. They came with hospitals, but the cost of treatment was kneeling before their God. They made us choose between survival and tradition, and slowly, we forgot who we were." Lisa frowned. "But why did no one resist?" Grandma chuckled bitterly. "Oh, they did. The custodians of our wisdom fought with knowledge. The warriors fought with courage. But how do you fight an enemy that poisons the minds of your children? The battle was not fought with guns, but with stories, with everyday catechism. They changed our history, made us see ourselves as savages. And once you control a man's mind, you do not need to chain his body." Lisa clenched her fists. "But things are changing, Grandmother. People are waking up. We are learning the truth. I believe Nollywood has also learned his lesson." The old woman smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. "Yes, my child, the re-education has begun." Across Igbo land, a new consciousness was spreading. Social media became a battlefield where young Igbo intellectuals tore down the false narratives of colonial history. Traditional priests, once mocked as backward, were now being sought out for their wisdom. Parents who had once named their children after foreign saints were now choosing names rooted in Igbo spirituality. Films and books that once portrayed Igbo deities as evil now told the real stories. The truth was returning. It certainly would not be easy. The damage took a very time long to materialize. It will equally take a long time to undo the brainwash. And with truth, power will eventually come. Igbo children would no longer be catechized that they have no powers of their own. Our holy ancestors made us to understand that we are half human, half spirit. We had mastered how to control the elements. We were engaged in astral travel and other metaphysical endeavors, until a wayward doctrine told Igbo man that he is a sinner, destined for hellfire. The Igbo race abandoned their ingenuity and went into fasting and prayer, to pray himself out of the imaginary fire which his opponents threw at him. Nollywood fanned the flames of religious and societal deceit, and bookmen who have swapped their common sense with books watched as a generation were made lunatics. People were literally made sleepwalkers of imaginary heaven and hellfire. Young men and women were performing the sacred ritual of reconnecting with themselves and their personal gods. Those who understood the beauty of African spirituality are rebuilding shrines, not as places of fear, but a place of honor to those who lived before them. The traditional custodians of Igbo knowledge and sacred wisdom have begun hosting gatherings where people came to learn about their spiritual heritage. And perhaps the greatest symbol of change, however, is that the churches were emptying, even when the harbingers of these foreign religion would not accept it. Godly people who are terrorized by one Nigeria have prayed for better days, They have prayed that the knees of one Nigeria should go down. But as they prayed, the knees of one Nigeria, instead of going down, is steadily going up. People somewhat found out they have been duped. The system have played 419 on them. The Igbo race are distancing themselves from churches and organized religion, not because they hate foreigners, but because they finally understood what had happened. The missionaries had never come to save them, but to break them. Foreign religion merely came to feed the Africans with empty spoon, to make them feel comfortable in their state of discomfort. It was designed to make someone who is trapped in one Nigeria to accept that the man-made problem of one Nigeria is an act of God. The growing desertion of these tranquilizing doctrine is not going unnoticed. Religious leaders, politicians, and foreign powers watched with unease. The church leaders frightened people of a return to darkness. The government feared that reconnecting with ancestral knowledge would make the people harder to control. Nollywood feared losing fans or source of income should the narrative change. Even Western media, which once praised African cultures when they were diluted for entertainment, now called the movement dangerous. But the people no longer cared. They had spent centuries in spiritual servitude, and now they were breaking free. Chief Ogadagidi was buried in Lagos. Few of his relatives who insisted that Chief must be buried in Igbo land tried and failed. Every ambulance that was hired to take the corpse from Lagos to Igbo land broke down before they got to Shagamu flyover. And when they wanted to outsmart the corpse, they contracted a cargo company and loaded the casket containing his body into a commercial lorry. But just as the lorry was about to negotiate the famous Ojota Bridge, the driver lost his control and the lorry emptied its whole cargo on the road along Ikorodu Expressway. That last incident became a bold handwriting on the wall. Igbo land doesn't need the body of Chief Ogadagidi. Chief was buried in one of the abandoned cemetery in Lagos. Should he one day reincarnate, he would never find his way back to Igbo land. That is the end of the story. Thanks for watching, good people. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Hit the notification bell for more inspirational bulletin. Warm greetings.